Hey, what is going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and welcome back to another episode of Mario's Minute. For those who do not know, this here is the second podcast that I do. My main podcast, Mod Chat, is a little more edited, a little bit more structured, and it's more on topic with the world of video game modding and video game console modding. If you are a fan of Mod Chat, I know you all might be wondering what happened in this month's episode. It's going to come out after this episode, I promise you on that one. However, this is not Mod Chat. This here is Mario's Minute, which is a podcast I do in which I come on here and I talk to you all about really whatever the hell I want to. It comes in two different forms. It comes in a video visual form here on the Mr. Mario 2011 YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey channels, and it also comes in an audio only podcast form like an actual podcast, so you can take it around and listen to it wherever the hell you want to. Simply look up Mario's Minute on your favorite podcasting app, host, provider, or platform, and you should hopefully be able to find it. I know it's not available on all of them, but it is available on most of them. Either way, like I said, this is a podcast where I come on here monthly. Sometimes I have a guest, sometimes I don't, and I or we talk about really whatever we want to on here, within reason, of course. Now, I try to alternate month to month, and last month was a solo episode, so this month would have been a guest episode, but I did not get a guest for this month here. My apologies on that, but that's also, in my opinion, okay here, just because I actually kind of really want to talk about the Switch 2 and my experiences with it on here, and kind of just, I guess, geek out a little bit about it, criticize it a bit as well too, and really just kind of get my thoughts out about it overall. I've had it for, when did it come out? It came out on the 5th, right? So I've had it for about, at the time of recording this, I've had it for about 2.5 weeks right now, so don't take this as a review, take this as a first impressions, because I don't really know how good of an actual review you can give to a system right when it's coming out, and even so, like if I was going to give it an actual review, I'd probably wait for at least a month before I was doing that, but I'm sure some people have had some thoughts on, what I think about it, and to be honest here, my thoughts at this point, I'm sure there's going to be improvements and there's going to be changes, but they seem to be pretty solidified, and I'll kind of, talk about that here. So getting right into the Switch 2, I will say this is probably one of those, it was odd. It was not bad, but it was odd seeing the lead up to this, right? Because there's been, I think we just kind of overall got so desensitized to new Switch news after so many years of rumors of a Switch Pro or a Switch successor. I know once Nintendo ended up revealing it, which was kind of odd the way they did it at the beginning of this year, where they just end up dropping a video showing, hey, this is the Switch 2. You'll find out more about it in April. That seemed to be kind of out of the ordinary for them, although I think it also fed the appetite of people who were really, really wanting a Switch 2, and some kind of formal announcement. Like, I was excited about it, I thought it was cool, but at the same time, it wasn't super surprising, because the Switch 2, very similar to how the Switch Lite was not a very well-kept secret. There were some really accurate, pretty spot-on leaks that were coming out if you had paid attention here and there, and even I'm one of those people, I'm not necessarily a rumor mill and leaker person who, I want to pay attention to that stuff. I usually try to avoid it. But it was near the end, the last few ones where it showed some of the 3D models, some of the motherboard leaks, specification leaks. I was like, actually, this seems pretty credible. It's not just a person on Twitter saying, hey, it has this CPU or it has this component on it. No. This is actually pretty well credible, so I'm going to pay attention to this one here. So that's all to say. I mean, it was better than the Switch Lite. I would say the Switch Lite, I feel like we kind of knew everything about it before it was ever officially announced. But nonetheless, we still got our Switch 2 here. It was officially revealed and everything, as we know, back in April, where it got more updates on pricing and how things were and the features and such, and it was interesting to see, just because it wasn't necessarily a thing of oh, this is going to be so many more months from now. It's no, this system's coming out in 2 months. The hardware's done at this point. And that's one thing I definitely want to focus on with the system itself too. The hardware, I really don't have any complaints about. And you got to realize too, I'm one of those people, I've had multiple Switches. I have had one of each SKU. So I've had the original Switch, I've had the Switch Lite, I have the Switch OLED. I would say the Switch, the original one, is one of my favorite systems in recent years. It's not my favorite system, but it is one of my favorite game consoles. So I've had a lot of experience with it. I've also taken them apart, I've done some repairs, cleanups, modifications, all that fun stuff on there. So there are people who know a lot more about them than I do, but I feel like at the same time I do know more than the average person you would ask on the street who might even be playing their original Switch. So a lot of the issues that I was having with the hardware on the original Switch were iterated and iterated upon until they were resolved pretty well. And I feel like we're kind of going to see the same thing with the Switch too. I know that it seems kind of counteractive for me to say that because I was just, complimenting the hardware on here, but let me get to that. So the original Switch, it came out the gate and the hardware was just not super great. I'm not even talking about the specifications on there. I'm talking if you had one of the launch models. You all have seen I had so many RMAs where I had to return accessories. I had to return the system so many times. There was one time I returned the system to Nintendo. Like I kid you all not, my Switch was bent. It was bent. It was not straight. I returned it to Nintendo. They sent it back to me in the exact same shape. And I had to call them up. I was like, hey, I sent this off to get repaired and I don't think it was touched at all. And then I had to talk to, they had to escalate it and I had to talk to a supervisor who just verified it with me. And it was a very quick call. She was like, hey, so what's going on? And I told her what happened. She's like, okay, so the Switch is bent and is it still bent? I said, yes. She's like, you sent it in, it's still bent. I said, yeah. She's like, oh, okay, well, go ahead, send it back. And then I sent it back, and from what I can tell, they put a whole new shell on it and everything, so now it's looking fine. But I had that. I had a speaker issue. I had, the connectivity issues with the left Joy-Con, just with Joy-Cons in general there. Even my OLED, I think the only issue that I did run into was at one point, my system the screen turned orange. I made a video about that. I didn't bother returning it, but that's the only issue I ran into with the OLED model, thankfully, but it just turned orange, and it seemed to be, from what I looked up, it seemed to be an issue with the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi component on there, where if it starts to fail or it's, begin to have some issues, it could do that. So even then, a lot of the hardware was refined on the OLED, being the final model of the original Switch, but it still had its shortcomings on there, unfortunately. So we also didn't see any type of specification upgrade either. Yeah, we did see the SoC updated to the Mariko chipset, which ended up being more secure. It ended up running cooler. It ended up also using up less battery life as well too. So that was nice. But overall, a lot of the odd quirks and connectivity issues that were plaguing the original Switch, I really haven't experienced on the Switch 2. However, I am getting, how do I put it? I'm almost getting premonitions of what we've seen with the original Switch. We're going to see the same thing on the Switch 2, which is to say that if you're not wanting to get one right off the bat, you would probably get a better model later on. Because one thing I noticed is that if you had the original Switch, if you had the original model, it's not Ala, it's the Arista model. That was it. So essentially a launch Switch. The battery life is not great on that system. The battery life was not improved until they switched the internal chipset over to a Mariko chipset, which you can find in later revisions of the original Switch. You can find it in the Switch Lite, and of course you can find it in the Switch OLED model. I was coming from an OLED model, so I was used to the system running cooler, and I was used to nicer battery life on there. So playing on the Switch 2, when you go from the original OLED model to the Switch 2, you're going to notice a pretty big dip in battery life. I'm talking if you're going to be playing something like Mario Kart in handheld, you might get 2-3 hours of battery life on there. It's honestly not great. I do believe this can be improved. While the hardware has been, pretty well locked in, it's technically sound in my opinion. Right now, what they can produce for the price point in 2025, I feel like they have that locked down. And probably in the future, and we don't even know, just because I'll just say this, because the political climate and where prices are with things, I don't know how or when this will be possible, especially when we're seeing prices on game consoles going up. But the hope would be that as components get easier to, easier, cheaper, more affordable, hopefully to produce, as they become improved upon, we would see some minor SKU updates to the system. So we would see something such as a revised chipset with a shrunken die, which would give us cooler play and better battery life. That's what I'm hoping for on there. Now, talking with the original Switch 2, I guess we can say we're really talking about the future here, I guess. I believe that there are going to be issues that will crop up that we will see because no game system comes out perfect. Plus, if Nintendo is going to be iterating on the hardware to bring the price of it down and make it more efficient, I have no doubt that we're going to see revisions to the original one, at least internal revisions, so maybe in a few years we'll see a Switch 2 model that is similar to the Mariko units, where it's going to run cooler and it's going to have a nicer battery life. Because that would be nice. That is something I notice, again, coming from the Switch OLED model to go into the Switch 2. It's not like it's like super loud or anything, but the fan does consistently run. The system gets warmer than I would expect. Not hot, but just a little bit warm. And again, that battery life on there. So if that is resolved, if that is improved, that would be welcomed. I also do believe, because the system is big, that is one big thing. That is, no pun intended there, but everyone I've shown it to, everybody who sees it in person, the first thing they comment about is the size of it. And if it's not the size, it's like how nice the system looks. Because it is a nice looking system. It is sturdy. It is a strong, really like beautifully done system. So I don't have any complaints about that from the hardware look side of it. But because it's so big, I do feel like we're also going to see a Switch 2 Lite. Probably in the next few years, it's probably going to be something similar where they're going to, just do the same thing where it's not going to have any type of HDMI out. I'm even pulling up the system right now. Really, they could even do this successfully if they could just shrink down the system. Like, I'm imagining just taking the screen itself and just eliminate the bezels, but don't make the screen bigger. And I feel like if they just kept the screen size the same, but just eliminated the bezels, they could shrink the system down just enough that it would be a Switch 2 Lite. And it would still be bigger than the Switch Lite, but it would be some that, could be a portable only option that would be sold like that. I also think that we are going to see a Switch 2 OLED model. Determinations for that were essentially that it would be nice to have a OLED screen on the Switch 2 right now, but it's probably prohibitively expensive to install one in there. So if you wanted to get a Switch 2 with a OLED screen, you might be paying $600 for it versus $450. So I have no doubt that we're probably going to see a OLED refresh several years down the line. So that's my own prediction, just keeping that in mind. But the screen itself is still beautiful. I know there were some people that were saying like the original Switch OLED screen is better. I'm not saying it isn't, but the Switch 2's screen, it is a nice improvement. It does have extra features on there as well too, such as higher refresh rate, variable refresh rate as well, which I think it's silly that variable refresh rate, I mean, it is a big deal now, and it's cool that it's on a portable system. But for Nintendo to say that the Switch 2 had variable refresh rate and then later on saying, oh, hey, sorry about that, actually, it's only in portable mode. We cannot do variable refresh rate through the dock to a output on a screen. So we're going to take that back, and there's no plans to add it in right now. So that was disappointing, and that kind of brings about a whole, I guess, a whole symptom to me that I've seen with this, that the hardware seems to be pretty sound. I know I keep saying that, but the hardware hasn't really needed at this moment in time much of an update, or it hasn't really been attached to much of an issue. But it's been obvious to me that Nintendo has really just been trying to catch up on the software side of house. Because even like when it was announced, like officially in April, it was about 2 months before the system was retailing. At that point, the hardware's done. It's final. It's final. Like, you're not in like beta or like gamma or whatever it is. It's like, no, by 2 months out, you need to have the hardware finalized, which is how they were able to immediately go out and do those like Switch 2 experiences where people were able to actually play with the Switch 2 2 months earlier. But the software itself was all still being worked on. And one of the, quick facts about it that you can see is if you end up getting a launch unit, I believe it came on firmware 19.0.0 or 19.0.1, or it came on like some 19 version firmware. But out of the box, if you open up the Switch 2, you fire it up, you do not have any access to switch backwards compatibility. And even though there is a micro SD card slot on the system itself, you cannot use that SD card slot. You physically cannot use that SD card slot until you update the firmware to a supported version. Now, you don't have to be on the latest firmware, but you need to be on at least firmware 20.1.1. So that shows to me that they essentially did for this system, which I mean, it's not a huge surprise now seeing other companies have done it, but it shows to me that they got the system ready to go physically, all boxed up, shipped out and such, and they were just going to do a big day one patch to, fix up the other issues and add in extra features there. Quite literally, switch like 2 big features there, switch backwards compatibility and micro SD card support. You cannot use either of those features until you update the firmware on your system. So, and you have to download at least the first firmware update on there. So, that's been interesting to see there. I bring that up as well because I know with the original Switch, I believe it did have like a really early firmware update, but even on the base 1.0.0 firmware, everything was pretty much ready to roll on that. But again, it was kind of flipped there. The software was pretty much ready to go where you could completely set it up out of the box, not connect to the internet, and to my recollection, all the features worked on there. The only thing would be if you played a game that required a higher firmware, you did have to update the firmware on there. But then again, the hardware there had a lot more issues. So it's really, what do you want to deal with? Do you want to deal with software issues that can be patched out through firmware fixes, or do you want to deal with hardware issues where you might not even be able to fix those hardware issues? You might just have to get a whole separate system. Personally, for me, I would rather go with the Switch 2 launch here, in which the hardware has been solidified. It's ready to go for the most part, but the software has to be added in later. So that's been fine by me, at least. Now, for backwards compatibility, while I've enjoyed it a bit, admittedly between playing Mario Kart World and such, I will say at this time, I joked about it in my unboxing video, but the Switch 2 really doesn't have any games. It's pretty similar to how the PS5 was when it launched, and some would even argue still is right now. But when it comes down to it, if you're getting the Switch 2 only for Switch 2 games, at this moment in time at launch, not really worth it, in my opinion. You get Mario Kart World, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Really awesome game. I've actually thoroughly enjoyed that game. I have liked it quite a bit. I've had a lot more fun with it than I expected. The shocking thing to me has been the free roam mode, of all things. I didn't think that... I thought it was just going to be half-baked, in all honesty. I didn't think that it was going to be that great. I thought it was going to be a tacked-on thing. But seeing how seamless you transition from the in-game menu to free roam is really awesome. Being able to actually go off the beaten track, quite literally, is a really cool feature as well, too, being able to actually explore like that. And they put enough in the game that you can actually explore and have fun. So free roam, I will say, though, is very divisive among people. You either love it or you hate it. There's no in between. I haven't met anyone who says, free roam is okay. For me, at least, I'm of the camp that I love it, and I was actually shocked when I ended up saying, and I will say here, that free roam is actually my favorite feature in Mario Kart World. That's no insult to the rest of the game either. The rest of the game is really awesome. The versus setup on there, they have the battle on there, they have Grand Prix, of course, and they have the knockout tour as well, too. Difficult game, though. It's one of those games that if you're just taking your skill set from Mario Kart 8 or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and transplanting it into World, you're going to have to get good. And essentially the way you get good, from what I'm seeing, is you just have to learn the maps. You need to learn how to wall ride. You need to learn the optimal shortcuts and the little hidden secrets of the map. So you just have to learn the game to get good at it. Because if you're just going to play it like a bog standard racer, even if you're drifting all over the place, you're going to have a hard time. And I'm not great at video games, right? So it's at least made me happy to see that that's kind of been the consensus across the board. My own opinion on this, though, is I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who are hoping for or even asking and wanting the game to be nerfed in some way, where it will be made easier. Maybe drops will be better, or the CPUs will be made to be a little bit easier and such. I actually don't want the difficulty to be changed. I think the difficulty, it is difficult, mind you, right? But I think that's also just a part of the shenanigans with Mario Kart, and I also believe that this is kind of a situation where, well, you kind of need to get good. And this is coming from someone who is not great at the game. So I should be one of the prime candidates for saying make the game easier or make the game have a difficulty slider or difficulty level, while as I'm like, No, I mean, if you're okay at it, you're okay at it. If you're bad at it, you're bad at it. If you're good at it, you're good at it. And if you want to get good at it, you got to get good. That's that's about my opinion on that. But the Switch One backwards compatibility, I haven't run into any direct games that I haven't been able to boot up. I will say one of the first original Switch titles I ended up launching was Grand Theft Auto 3. That game, I have the Grand Theft Auto trilogy, the 3D trilogy on the original Switch, of course, and I've played them all on there. They're not, that's really like the worst way to play it. I'm just gonna admit it to you guys. I'm not gonna try and like say, oh, it's fine. It's like, no, it's not. Even if you use like a modded Switch to like boost the clock speeds and such, there's still going to be some juddering and there's still going to be some other issues. Just not really a smooth experience. So that was one of the first games I was hoping to see any improvement on the Switch 2. And I'll be honest with you all, I fired it up and after about 2 minutes I closed out because I kind of just sighed because I'm like, it's not even a fault of the Switch 2. It's an issue with the programming of this port and the game itself. But my experience when I was playing it, at least in handheld, no, it still didn't like run any smoother that I was noticing, at least. And also just with the way the upscaling and the resolution such worked on there, the game still didn't look super great. I was expecting it to look a little bit sharper, but it didn't really look the best. It kind of had a little bit of a Vaseline look almost. If you're wanting to see more of a look at different games and how they've compared on the Switch versus Switch 2, I know a friend of the show, an awesome dude, Modern Vintage Gamer, MVG, he's done fantastic coverage of that, so I haven't really felt the need to do like the technical know-how or breakdown of that specifically. But the first game, like first game I ended up playing on there was Ring Fit Adventure, where I was able to transfer my data over, I was able to play it and such. And I even, at one point, there was like one or two times I did dock it to my TV, and I was playing it like in my little like workout area and such. And at least for me, I felt like the game did look sharper while running on the Switch 2. I felt like it looked better, and that's probably due to upscaling on there, so that didn't surprise me all too much. I've even seen reports with like, it depends on the limitations of certain games. Like, for example, I believe games that were limited to like GPU limitations seem to be running better. Games that were limited to RAM speeds on the original Switch seem to be running better, such as Bayonetta 3. However, games that were tied to the CPU speed itself, I believe those games haven't really had it's not they don't have a benefit, they just don't have as much of a benefit as the other two types of game limitations I mentioned. Then when it comes to frame rate, there's not really a way, unless the game has it, where you can like toggle, unlimited or limited frame rates on there. But it seems to be that if a game has a frame rate cap, like if it's supposed to be targeting 30 or targeting 60, if you play it on the Switch 2, it's more than likely going to stay pretty stable at that. Then, if you are running a game where it has a uncapped frame rate, that's even better because you're able to kind of smooth it out a bit on there. But I'm bringing this up quite a bit, like the original Switch games, because that's really the most that you would be playing on the Switch 2. Because if you're playing the Switch 2 really just for how do I put it, the exclusives and such on there, you have Mario Kart World. You have not Fast Remix, but the sequel to Fast Remix. Well, I'm going to look that up real quick. Fast Remix. Sorry, I should have known this one here, but I did not know. Fast Fusion, that was it. I just forgot what the name of it was. So you have Fast Fusion, which is a digital title. You also have Welcome Tour, which I did end up picking up. I haven't gotten too far into it, but it's cool for what it is, but I believe it should have been a pack-in game instead of a separate $10 purchase, but it is what it is there. So you really don't have anything to draw you into the system right now in terms of exclusives, unless you absolutely love Mario Kart. Then that one I could understand. I'm one of those people, though, I like to get systems on launch. I like to see the evolution of the system, and I almost kind of like being a ambassador of sorts. Not only I feel like I can talk about it with, you all, with other people, share my experiences a bit more accurately, as opposed to just someone who doesn't have the system and, wants to hate on it. But then, being able to introduce friends, family, things like that to it, and just people overall, it's been cool to do that, and I always like doing that with different systems. Like, one example here that's helped out has been shortly after the Switch came out, I ended up visiting some of my family, And my younger brothers, they were super excited. They were trying out the Switch 2. They had so much fun with Mario Kart. They thought it was a beautiful game. They loved the thing. And then at one point, they went to hang out with one of their friends. And their friend says something along the lines of, yeah, oh, I heard the Switch 2 kind of sucks. And I heard Mario Kart's mid. I heard it's really not that good. And my brothers are more like, no, that's not true at all. And turns out this friend just heard about that online, which is like, well, everyone online hates everything. That's how it goes. People want to stick out. People want to poke at little things. There's always going to be haters of anything online, right? But my brothers said, like, no, we have it at home. We tried it out. Like, it's good. The game is awesome. So even though it's funny because even though I'm sharing my experiences and my opinions and such on this system, I'm also one of those people. I believe that in order to make your own opinion and really see how you feel about something, and not going to be everything, but like a game system, for example, you do need to try it out for yourself. That's my opinion on there. However, going back to the games, like I said, you really only have 2 or 3 exclusives on the system. One of them is noteworthy, and then the rest of the games that are on there, you could play on other systems and probably cheaper and maybe even better. I know one of the games, for example, one of the big ones has been Cyberpunk 2077. Really impressive that you could play it on the Switch. Awesome that you can purchase the entire game physically as well too, with the DLC and everything. But I'm one of those people, I don't really, I mean, it's an old game now. Not that I'm disrespecting it or anything, but I got Cyberpunk on launch. I stopped playing it shortly after just because the original launch Cyberpunk was not great. Even with the day one patch on there, it just wasn't really that good, and I just need to revisit it. But it's one of those games now where if I wanted to play Cyberpunk, I would play it on my PS5. I guess if you're only playing on Switch 2 and that is your thing and you don't have any other systems and you really want to play Cyberpunk, sure. If you're a giant Cyberpunk fan that wants Cyberpunk 2077 on everything, sure, that's fine. But I think I'm kind of, I'm kind of over the impossible port syndrome on there. Just from the original Switch, because we've seen multiple games like Wolfenstein 2 or Doom 2016 and many other games on the original Switch where it was really impressive they got ported over, but then I'm like, well, have you seen it? Have you played it? Because I'll tell you this, I played through probably over half of Wolfenstein 2 on Switch. It's not great playing it on the Switch. It is impressive that it plays on there as well as it does, but do I recommend playing it as a primary? No. You would get a much better experience playing it on any other platform. And that's not me trying to poo-poo on the Switch. That's just me being factual about it there. Even Doom 2016, I tried out a bit, and again, it's cool from a perspective of, hey, this shouldn't work on the Switch, but it does. But is the port itself, like, is it fun to play? And in my opinion, not so much. We've seen it done well with some other games, like Skyrim has been ported to every single system, under the sky, it seems like. And I've played it on the Switch. Seems to play pretty well on there. Don't really have many complaints about that. So, yeah, it's going to have its Bethesda bugginess, but it's not going to be as, cut down and shrunken down like something like Doom 2016 was. So when it comes to kind of the impossible port situation, I still think they're cool from a technical level, but am I trying to really limit myself and play those on the Switch? Not really at this time. I'm kind of over that part personally. So that's all to say here when it comes to games that, at this moment, not really a huge surprise because the system just launched, so this is technically and usually what happens. But yeah, there's really only one game that's worth picking up directly on there. So if you get a Switch 2, you're really just going to be playing original Switch games on there, which goes back to saying if people are wondering if they should pick up a Switch or if they or Switch 2 or if it's worth it on there. The thing I've really been telling people is, I guess as an overall thing, I don't make decisions for people, right? I've just, a few years ago, it was kind of just a personal decision I made. I don't make decisions for people on there. I like to put out the information. I'll answer questions. I'll give my opinion on something. But if someone's saying, hey, do you think I should get a Switch 2? I'm not going to make that decision for you on there. That is up to you at the end of the day. However, in regard to actually getting a Switch 2, and if somebody would enjoy it, I'll say if you really liked the Switch, you'll like the Switch 2. if you wanted to visit the Switch's catalog, if you really want to get a Switch, if you just never had one for whatever reason, you've always been interested in it, the Switch 2 would be a great system to jump for in that regard. But if you never really cared about the original Switch, if the games didn't really appeal to you, if it just kind of seemed like a gimmicky system, if you just weren't a fan of it, the Switch 2 is not going to make you a fan of the Switch ecosystem. I can tell you all that right now. Now, maybe the only thing that is in the middle of that is, let's say you were interested in the Switch, you were interested in the games, but you just didn't like how they performed, and that was enough of an issue for you. They generally do perform better on the Switch 2, especially if they get patches. We're kind of in the same camp as the PS5 now, where there's games that are released on Switch and Switch 2. There's also games that have Switch 2 exclusive patches that are still Switch 1 games. There's Switch 1 games that don't have patches at all that end up playing better on the Switch 2. And then there's update or upgrade packages where you do have to pay for them. I know like both Zelda games, well, the big ones at least, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, those two end up having like Switch 2 upgrades that you can purchase, which you can still use your original Switch build of the game, but you essentially download this big like DLC and update package, and then that lets you play the Switch 2 native build of the game while running the Switch 1 version, or at least using it to boot on there. There is one big thing that I should kind of talk about in here, actually two big things. Let's talk about the modding aspect of it. So I want to talk about the modding aspect, and I want to talk about the cartridges. Now, since we saw the original Switch hacked up and really out in the wild, like very early on, I'll tell you that unless... it's very rarely that lightning hits the same place twice. I think it might even be impossible. So I'm just going to say don't bank on that happening. I covered it pretty in depth, at least on Mod Chat and such. That's when Devin was on the show. And Devin and I, we were really looking into this like every episode. I think even Daniel was on there as well too, because it's been a long while. But when we were looking into this, we were seeing how exciting it was that everything was happening. And that was because of a boot ROM bug. Like the first Switch mods were because of a boot ROM bug that was not from Nintendo. It was actually due to NVIDIA and their Tegra X1 processor. So that was due to that. And the reason why I share that distinction is because we did see a few type of like mods and hacks and some entry points on the original Switch that were software only completely. One of them was on firmware 3.0.0. Where you ended up essentially kind of using like a DNS trick and you were able to boot into the homebrew launcher and such. But it was very limited. It was tedious to get it up and running and boot up. And I used it on a Switch. It wasn't a really great experience because now we realized looking back, that was running in applet mode. So trying to run emulators, trying to run applications, trying to just do a lot of intensive stuff in applet mode was not good. It wasn't a good experience. This one also isn't talked about all too much, but there is one, I had to look it up again. It's called Caffeine, and it is very limited. It works on Switches that have never, ever been connected to the internet and are on firmware 4.1.0, which means that they work on, it is a software-only modification that you can use on a patched Switch, excuse me. You could technically do it on an unpatched one as well, but it's the patched ones, not the Marico unit ones, but the patched ones you can do it on if you have one on a low enough firmware. And from what I recall, essentially you have to go through a process where, when you like turn on the Switch and right at the beginning at the home screen, there's like some, almost like some news bulletins right there. You end up carving out one of those boxes where it essentially becomes a launcher for this exploit. So once you end up replacing that on your system, you can boot that up, and then it kind of does a warm boot, like a reboot. I guess I should say a soft reboot of your Switch, and then from there, you're actually able to boot into custom firmware and such. But that's to say, we're on, as I'm recording this, firmware 20.1.5. And we haven't seen any software-only entry points like that since 4.1.0. And that was incredibly limited for the amount of systems that one could be run on. Again, even if you have one of those systems, if you connect to the internet one time, you're out of that exploit. And it's just how it works with, I believe it's probably like the real-time clock on there. It was something else, but it's very limited in that regard. So that's all to say, that it was a hardware issue before that was causing that. Then it was fixed up. And then the other mods have really been due to glitching on there. And I'm not counting the MiG switch in this regard here. However, when it comes down to that all, the Switch 2, even though it's using a Switch 2 firmware, it's really using the same ecosystem and same OS, which is Horizon OS, which has been applauded actually by custom firmware developers and reverse engineers for being a really good, really not robust, but a really streamlined, good operating system, and secure as well too, where it really has perfect anti-piracy on there. But that's all to say, we really had our entry points outside of those like other two software ones I talked about. On the original Switch, one of them was a boot ROM bug, which was due to NVIDIA, and the other one is glitching. So there's definitely not going to be, I don't anticipate we're going to see a boot ROM bug year one on the Switch 2 again. And from what I know, there's been glitch protection on the actual system itself. So we're probably not going to see the same methodology on there. Do I believe the Switch 2 is eventually going to get modified in some way? Yes. We even ended up seeing on day one that there was actually somebody who they were able to access the browser and they were able to run some userland native code on there, which was really cool. But they even said, like, look, it's really not worth running on here. It's kind of tedious to get this up and running and working. It's very limited. This is only userland. You can't do too much here. You can't jump out of it just yet. This is not a kernel exploit. It's not even anywhere close. But it's at least a little bit of something. So something is better than nothing there. Is this Switch 2 going to get modified eventually? In my opinion, I think it probably will at one point. I just don't know how long that's going to take. It could be next month. It could be 3 years from now. It could also be never. Or it could be, I don't know, it could be something else where we see it happen in like 20 years, 20, 15 years. So we'll just see what happens there. But on top of that, I think I will actually bring up, this kind of a little bit of a segue between the go into cartridges, but also talking about the modding aspect. I know one thing that has really gotten a lot of attention has been the MiG Flash, where in case you don't know, this is a cartridge where you're able to dump your original Switch cartridges into a specific format. You're able to put them on a micro SD card, put it into the MiG switch, and then or the MiG Flash, I guess they renamed it, and then you could use it as a flash cart for your system. Now, this had been used quite a bit, it seemed, on the original Switch. It wasn't as big as I had expected on there. Now, I had done a mod chat talking about this, which in short, I said that I thought this was really interesting from a technical level. I was not interested in getting one. I'll be honest, I have not purchased one. I did not end up getting one. I've had people, offer to let me borrow one. I've had companies offer to send one to review. I've just turned it down all the way across the board because for me, I thought it was kind of too little too late in a way, where I said if this came out at the beginning of the Switch's life cycle, it might make more sense. But we're at the point now where technically every single original Switch can be modified. Custom firmware is incredibly mature. And even with this, even if you do it legitimate, you back up your own games, you keep them updated, you do all that stuff. If you do it legitimate, it's going to just take a lot of time. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be annoying. And even if you use it for nefarious, pirating reasons on there, it's the worst possible way to pirate Nintendo games and pirate Switch games. So I was just there yeah, I mean, at technical level, I think it's cool, but actually using it, I think it's dumb. I have not shared this, actually. I'll share this because at one point there was 2 times I did consider getting the MiG Flash. One time, it was because of fear of missing out. That was it. And I decided to just kind of squish that and put it away in a box and tape it up and then just put it away. So I was good on the FOMO side. But then there was another time I considered doing it because I'm there's times I travel and if I could bring 5 or 10 cartridge games with me, just dump them, put them on the MiG Flash and play them, that would be really cool. And if anybody has a MiG Flash, maybe you can answer this for me. Because apparently I knew someone, know them online at least. They are on Twitter as Stoned Modder. So shout out to them. They used to go by Red the Trainer. But they were trying to work with and contact the MiG Flash team in regard to this issue. Because essentially they had found with their own that if you have one game, if you have one ROM on the micro SD card, it operates just fine. But if you have multiple games on there, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 games, if you're playing a game and you put the Switch into sleep mode, it's fine. But when you pull it out of sleep mode, I believe the MiG Flash probably tries to like reinitialize the cart, and essentially it simulates disconnecting and reconnecting the cartridge. So then when you pull your system out of sleep mode, it ends up crashing the game. And when I saw that, and I saw that he was trying to reach out to MiG Flash and they were trying to fix it a little bit, and I believe the last thing I ever saw about it was that they had made it maybe a little bit better, but it was still an issue. At that point, I was like, you know what? I'm not getting the MiG Flash at all, because that is ridiculous. Like, I was thinking of this as a convenience tool for me, like when I travel here and there, so I don't have to bring a bunch of cartridges with me, and that was really going to be about it. And I'm honest when I'm saying that, like really, I'm honest saying that there. But when I was like, I can't put my game into sleep mode, like really? Because I don't want to put one game on my MiG Flash, because at that point, it's like, if I'm only putting one game on there, that defeats the purpose of it. If I'm bringing multiple SD cards with one game on each, that defeats the purpose yet again, and that's just an expensive solution to a problem that I'm making up here. So essentially I was like, you know, that was really the main thing for me at that point. I was like, honestly, if this is fixed, I think it's fine. But if that is still an issue that is plaguing the system where I can't even suspend a game in sleep mode properly, that's a big issue on the MiG Flash itself, and that's enough for me to not get it. So if anybody's had that, like, let me know on there. But we were seeing that right out of the gate, people were trying the MiG Flash. I was asked to try it too. Yet again, I don't have one, not interested in getting one. But people who popped in the MiG Flash could not get the games to boot on the Switch 2. You can get the games to show up, but they could not boot up. If you try to boot them up, you would get an error code on there. So MiG Flash ended up releasing an update, and the update worked as expected. You were able to flash it to the MiG Flash, yeah, because it used to be called the MiG Switch, and they renamed it to the MiG Flash. You could flash it over to the MiG Flash. You put your games in there. You're able to cycle through them, and you're able to actually launch them now. The problem is, from what I've seen, almost every single person who has been doing so eventually gets a console ban. Whether it is quick within like a few hours or a day, or whether it's later on, they end up getting console bans. Not account bans, but console bans. This I'm not all too surprised by, because I know Nintendo is going to be going very hard with modding, or I guess against modding, especially their brand new system on here. The Switch, we're probably still going to see care on that, but like it's an old enough system that now, you know, they're going to want to focus a lot more on the Switch 2, so I can understand that. However, this showed to me, because a lot of people were saying, I backed up my own cartridges, I bought them all new, I don't share them, I wasn't doing any of this, I just use it for its intended, you know, good purpose, where I backed up my own games, I put them complete on there, and I still got banned. And in short, this is what I'm interested in. I would like to see exactly how it's being detected, but the short answer is that the Switch 2 is able to detect the MiG Flash, while the original Switch could not. I believe this is at a hardware level, because there's two aspects of it. One of them, if you use your MiG Flash completely as intended, like up and up, which is kind of ironic to say here, but if you use it on the up and up with your own backups, you don't share them, you don't do any of that there. On the original Switch, from what I've seen, it's been fine. And that's because the Switch, while as the firmware is, you know, pretty locked in, pretty solid, there's only so much you can do if the hardware is not smart enough to detect that, if the hardware doesn't have that logic, and if it can't be updated. In a way, it kind of reminds me of years ago, the Sky 3DS for the 3DS. In short, it was the exact same logic as this cartridge here, the MiG Flash, except for the 3DS. And I was told by someone, actually shout out to them on here, Left for Dog. I was told by someone in a comment before that Nintendo would not be able to patch that out. Now, effectively, nobody uses it anymore because games started to get anti-piracy measures on the games themselves, and then people started just going to custom firmware, and custom firmware ended up maturing a lot more, and now people install their games as opposed to putting the cartridge jumps on a cartridge and playing them from there. However, the other thing with it was that I was told that essentially it emulates a cartridge perfectly, and the only way that Nintendo could really patch that out, aside from, you know, in-game anti-piracy and such, like anti-piracy code and everything there, the only way Nintendo could really patch it out is if they completely rewrite how the cartridge loader is used on the 3DS. So that seems like that's what they did with the Switch 2, which would make sense. They had the capability, the opportunity of doing that there, and it's a whole new system in that regard. The other thing too is that the Switch 2 has always been able to detect the MiG flash. And this is the demonstration I have, which I can actually even reference something that I did here. If you look at my Switch 2 unboxing, the very first game I ever tried on there was Ring Fit Adventure, which is an original Switch game, but I didn't just put the cartridge in there. I end up hooking it up to a cartridge adapter. These across the board seem to be getting a little more popular, and in short, it is an adapter which hooks up directly to the cartridge port on your Switch, and then in the adapter you end up putting in like 4 or 8 cartridges, and you can press a button on the adapter to simulate cycling between each cartridge. It's very much like a disc changer back in the day, except for Switch cartridges. Now, on the day 1 firmware update, I was able to connect one of those up, put games in there, cycle between them, and they were able to boot up. No issue. It's been weeks of this, no bans on my end. I use it on the original Switch, no issue there. The Switch 2, however, even right out the gate, people were trying the MiG flash on there, and like I said, it was able to detect the games, but it wasn't able to boot up any of them. That right there shows me that the Switch 2 is smart enough and it has enough logic in place at the hardware level to be able to detect the difference between a cartridge and even seeing that same as a cartridge in an adapter or a ROM of a cartridge being run on a flash card. Like, the Switch is able to see that difference, and it always has been. The problem is, it just wasn't an issue that they had to take action on until those games started booting up. And then once people started booting up those games from a flash card, that's where the bans come in, because that's where all the logging, all the telemetry comes about. And I'll tell you this, there's no way to really get around that. Unless you're going to take your Switch 2 offline and never put it online again, there's not a way of doing that there. If you just try to do something like you unplug your internet, you put your system in sleep mode, you play games on the MiG flash, and then you turn it on, like you get onto the internet to play games online, and you play just like digital games and such, that's not going to get you, that's not going to be safe either, because all the logs are there on the system itself, and they get reported back. So that's where that's at. So if you have a MiG flash, don't use it on the Switch 2 unless you don't care about it at all and you want to get your system banned. But even if you're using it, completely on the up and up, you have your own games, you're dumping them yourself, you got them new, you're not sharing them out, you're not borrowing them, not doing any of that. You can really only use it for its full intended purposes safely in quotes, I'll say, on the original Switch, but not the Switch 2. So now the actual last thing I do want to talk about with the Switch 2 is my opinion on the game card situation. And in my opinion, it's just depressing out the gate. I'm one of those people, I don't even have any Switch 2 cartridges. I have, I have 3 Switch 2 games. I have Welcome Tour, I have Mario Kart World, and I have, what is the third one? Deltarune, that's it. Deltarune I purchased because I want to support it. It's a digital only title. I hope it does get a physical release, but it's a digital only title. I've been waiting for it, and I want to play the Switch 2 version on the Switch 2, so I bought that. Welcome Tour so I could have something else, and then Mario Kart World because, well, I end up getting the bundle that had Mario Kart World digitally. It wasn't so much as just the convenience on there because it was nice to be able to pay technically $50 for the game instead of $80, and I'm sure Nintendo was definitely doing that on purpose to kind of push that one there. But then even when I was pre-ordering the system, quite simply, that was the one that I was able to get. I was a little bit surprised because I didn't mind getting the base version and then purchasing Mario Kart World physically, but I couldn't really get a hold of the base version. But I was able to easily pre-order the one with Mario Kart World. So that's just how it went. And I didn't mind it too much because I knew that was the one game that I wanted to get. So even if I didn't get it digitally, I was going to get it physically. I still have plans to purchase a physical copy of it, but eventually, when there's a price drop, when it's on sale, if I can get it used for a good price, something like that, because I don't really see a point in paying $80 for a physical copy of the game right now when I have a $50 digital copy of the game that I'm currently playing. But for anybody who does not know about this, I'm sure people know at this point here, but kind of just to, recap it here, there's several different cartridges that are for the Switch 2. There's the original Switch cartridges. I believe there's some hybrid ones there, which are kind of operating like the free upgrade ones in a way for the Xbox. Actually, I would say Xbox is probably more for that, where they are essentially cartridges where they work in the Switch and the Switch 2, But if you play it on the Switch, you'll play the Switch 1 version, and if you play it on the Switch 2, you'll play the Switch 2 version. Depending on how it goes, I think this is kind of up to the developers as well too, and I guess the publishers there. You might get a Switch 1 build on the cartridge and just the permission to play the Switch 2 version, so you have to download it. You might get both builds on there. I don't know if it's the other way around, though. I don't know if there's games that have the Switch 2 version on there and then you have to download the original Switch version. I don't know about that one, at least. There are just cartridges for the Switch 2 that have the Switch 2 game on there, such as Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk 2077, but most physical releases coming out are game key cards. And if you don't know about these are not one-time use codes. Thankfully, that's really the only redeeming feature on there, but it is a game that comes in a box. You open it up, there's a cartridge in there, you put that cartridge into your system, and then you end up downloading the entire game from there. So you have to connect the internet, download the game. And then when you have the cartridge in your system, you can play that game. If you pull the cartridge out of your system, that game will not boot up until you put the game key card in there, because that acts as a game key instead of an actual cartridge. That's really all there is to it. From what I know, it just has enough data to verify that is the game itself. That's the license check for it. And I believe they have firmware updates as well too. So that's kind of the mess with cartridges there. Now, having different types of formats and such for this is not necessarily a new thing, not at all. The issue that people have had is that a very large majority of these games coming out on the Switch 2 are coming out as game key cards, meaning that they are physically being released without any actual game data on there, or with 99% of the game missing, technically, because there's a little bit of the game on there, just enough to verify it. However, we've seen this here with other platforms, not really saying it's right on this, and the frustrating thing about this is that we're seeing games, because now we're in that part of the generation where we're going to have games coming out on two different Nintendo platforms. They're going to come out on Switch and Switch 2. And there's been so many games that are being announced where the game is getting a physical release on both systems, but the Switch version is the game, it's on the cartridge, you can pull the cartridge out of the case, pop it into your Switch, you might have to download an update, but outside of that, you can play the game. And then the Switch 2 version is a game key card. And it might even cost more as well, too, because it's a Switch 2 game, which has frustrated a lot of people. I know from what I see, the technical and I guess financial reason behind that is due to the actual cost of cartridges on there. Where on the original Switch, you had, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think you had like 4 gig, 8 gig, 16, 32, and I believe 64 gigabyte cartridges. And when publishing a game, even if you're a third-party publisher, you have to purchase your cartridges from Nintendo, and then you get your games pressed on them and all that stuff there. So regardless of which company you're from, if you want to make a physical Nintendo game on the Switch, you have to order the cartridges through Nintendo. And you had multiple ways of doing that there. We saw some games where, for example, like let's say a small game like Undertale, that can go on a 4 gigabyte cartridge, which is going to be the cheapest one. There are some companies that do cheap out. Rockstar, shame on you all, but infamously they did L.A. Noire on the original Switch. The game comes on an 8 gigabyte cartridge, and that is, holds about 8 gigabytes worth of game content. The problem is when you plug it in, you have to download the rest of the game in an update. So right off the bat, you can't even play the beginning of the game. You can't even get it to boot. All you can do, if you have the game on cartridge, you have to download the rest of the game, which is about 12 gigabytes, if I remember correctly. So there was companies that did that. Now with Nintendo, apparently they're going to be releasing their first-party games. They're saying, at least, and I want to hold them to this, they're saying they're going to release their first-party games onto full cartridges. But the difference with the Nintendo Switch 2 is that the cartridges are either, you could either release digitally. If you have a Switch 1 game, I guess you could put it on, a Switch cartridge. But if we're talking about the Switch 2, you could either put it on a 64 gigabyte cartridge, or you can get a game key card. And those are your two options, and that's it. The 64 gigabyte one is already prohibitively expensive on the original Switch. I have no doubt it's still going to be expensive on the Switch 2. And there's also a lot of publishers where, for example, let's say Toby Fox, he wants to put, not Undertale, but Deltarune out on there. Deltarune is a small game. So it wouldn't, unless he wants to overcharge for a physical copy of it, it wouldn't make sense for him to put a small game on a 64 gigabyte cartridge. So there's been, most publishers have been opting, even the cool publishers we like, aside from like Cyberpunk, like, not Cyberpunk, but aside from CD Projekt Red, because apparently that game is large enough that it warrants, you can put the entire game with downloadable content and updates on a single 64 gigabyte cartridge. So I love that CD Projekt Red did that. But I think at this point in time, there's only like 5 games physically. And this is all the physical games that are released on the Switch 2. I think there's only 5 right now at this point in time that are full on the cartridge. The rest of them are game key cards. And what has made me happy about this, at least, is that the public is paying attention and they are listening and they're voting with their wallets, because from what I've seen, sales numbers have started to come in. And the sales numbers for the game key cards are pitiful, awful, abysmal, low. Thankfully, at least, you're not going to get duped on it. When you look at the front of the case, it has all the stuff all over, like at the bottom saying it's a game key card and you need internet and all that stuff. But what makes me happy, at least, is that people aren't purchasing these. I do hope there's a resolution, which a resolution here would be they need to lower the price and bring out smaller cartridges for publishers to publish their games on. But unfortunately, there's also part of me that's a little more realistic about it, and I just kind of see this as more of the inevitable push towards a digital-only future. So we at least have some way of getting some of the games proper physical on there. But even like companies like Limited Run Games, for example, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I mean, love them or hate them, whatever it is on there, whatever your opinion is, if they're going to be publishing a lot of indie games on the Switch 2 and they want it to be native on the Switch 2 and they can only purchase 64 gigabyte cartridges, I'm not sure how many people are going to pay. Like, I mean, you can already argue like their releases could be overpriced, but they're going to be only more overpriced when it comes to this. So I'm not really sure how that's going to go. It's not something I like. The way I'm handling it is, like I said, I haven't even said this. I'm just not interested. I'm not buying games on key cards. That's what I'm doing. The only game I'd really be interested in right now, because not Cyberpunk, but like I said, eventually I do want to get a physical copy of Mario Kart World for my collection, for my shelf, but that's not really a big... It's not a big priority for me right now, because technically I already do have the game. Aside from that, I don't really plan to get any other releases that are going to be on a game key card. And even some of the games are so big that they kind of break those limits as well too. I believe there's one game, Split Fiction, which I plan to get that on PS5 at one point, but I believe the game is actually so big that it just comes on a game key card, because the entire game is bigger than 64 gigabytes. So they couldn't even put the whole game on there. I think it probably could have been compressed, but that's one of those moments where I'm like, well, this kind of a LA, even if you pressed on there, it's kind of the same situation with LA Noire. So at that point, it's like, do I want to get that? Or do I just want to get it digitally? I'd probably just opt to get it digitally, which is probably what a lot of people are going to do. And I'm sure they'll probably try to take this and spin it in a way of, look, people aren't getting these physical versions, so let's just not do them, and we're just going to drop everything digitally on there. We'll see how it goes. Only time will tell on there, but this is just a giant step forward towards the all-digital future where you will own nothing and you will like it. Well, phew. All right, well, those have been my thoughts overall on the Switch 2, at least so far. It's been about 3 weeks that I've had it. Like I said, I've been happy with it. The hardware, I think, has been great for my own liking on there. I really like the Switch, so I seem to really like the Switch too. But if you're not in that camp, I don't think this is going to convert you over. I guess the very last thing I'll kind of say and echo in this sentiment is I've seen people talk about this and people kind of seem to reflect this, and I guess even developers have said this too, because one of my friends even asked me, which I thought was great. He was kind of asking, he's like, I don't get the Switch 2. Like, what exactly is it? How does it like feel? Like, I don't get it. And essentially, the consensus that people have described is that the Switch 2 actually feels like an at-home console now. It feels like a good 4K capable, nice running console that you can play on your TV. It looks great. It plays well. You have high refresh rates. You have 4K resolution. The games can look beautiful. They're fast. They run well. All that fun stuff. And as an added bonus, you can disconnect it from your TV and you can now just play it in handheld mode on your couch. That's what it feels. It doesn't really feel like a portable system that's really trying its hardest to be a console now. So that's been cool to see. Now, I guess, I've been speaking a lot about games here, but we're going to talk about some more games. I'll try and kind of get these ones quick here, because I'll be honest, I talked about the Switch 2 a lot longer than I expected on here, but that's how it goes sometimes. So the games I've been playing, really the main ones I've been playing have been, funny enough, I talked about Deltarune, but I haven't even fired that one up on there, because I need to go back and, well, okay, I fired it up. I got to the first screen, that was it. Because whenever a new chapter of Deltarune comes out, I like to replay Deltarune from the beginning. But I did get a little bit of Undertale shenanigans in there. My brothers, they enjoy Undertale quite a bit, and it's like every few years they'll go and replay the game. And that's what they end up doing when I was visiting. They end up playing through, and they got the true pacifist ending. And the funny thing is, one of my brothers hasn't really played too many RPGs, so I'm not really spoiling all too much here, because it's literally the end. But when, you end up finishing the game, you end up, seeing the credits and everything. At the very end, it just says Undertale, and it says the end under that, and it's just a black screen. And my brother was kind of waiting for something to happen on there, but nothing really happened, and I was like, dude, that's it. And he's like, wait, are you serious? I said, yeah, this is what happens with RPGs. When you get to the end, the game is just there. It just kind of stays in a soft lock, and you have to restart it. That's how it was on the PS1 and PS2. So he pressed a few buttons on his controller, and then the annoying dog ended up coming out, and it just kind of sat, or I guess it stood underneath the logo and everything. But that was really it. So it was kind of funny seeing and kind of imparting one of those like RPG moments on him. But no, I at least got to watch that. I didn't play it there. The game I've been playing the most, I would say, is easily Mario Kart World, where I've played it by myself. I've ended up playing it with my girlfriend. I played it with my brothers. I've had a lot of fun with this. Everyone who's played it has had a lot of fun with it as well, too. Technically, I ended up finishing the game as well, because I ended up getting the credits to roll in the end. So that was nice to see at least, but I'm still, you all know how it goes with Mario Kart World, or just Mario Kart in general. There's kind of like an infinite replayability there. So that was the game I at least finished this month. Aside from that, I picked RoboCop back up. I'm actually really close to the end on this game, so I am wanting to finish this, honestly, so I could, because I'm borrowing it right now, so I could give it back and then I could focus more on the Switch too. But RoboCop's been good. I will share the same sentiment. I will say now that I'm close to the end of the game that others have said, is that, man, the performance on that really just tanks. Like, it already wasn't the most performant game, right? But the performance really tanks near the end, especially when the city is in chaos and there's just NPCs everywhere and so much happening. And I talked with a friend about it, and he was saying, because I explained some of the quirks, and he was like, I think it's just Unreal Engine on there. And I kind of have to specify that, because Unreal Engine, it can do a lot. It can do a lot of things well, but there's also just an annoying factor of you have to optimize it as well, too. And this game is clearly not optimized, because it's annoying when you have a gun in there, for example, with a scope, and every single time you aim down your sights, for about half a second, you can't see anything. And it's not like, oh, it's just like dark and, you're bringing it up to your eye. It's like, no. The scope is up to your eye, and there's just a texture of like matte color, like tan color texture in the scope, and then you're able to see the enemies. I will say I do enjoy the game quite a bit. I do recommend people play it if you're interested in it. It's a fun, dumb game, but there's technical quirks like that, and some little quirks like that I think are unacceptable. It can be a beautiful game all at the same time. Like when I'm looking around the city and when there's the God rays, and you can kind of see the detail of like there's some scuffs and some scratches with the way the light is hitting your visor that covers your eyes, and they show that on the actual first person display. That's really cool. I love that. Seeing some of the nightlife, seeing some of the lighting, really cool. But then when you literally put the scope up to your eye and you can't see anything for half a second every single time, that does get a little bit bothersome. So I would say, that's been about it for this episode here. I did have one other thing I wanted to cover on here, but, I'm just going to have to save it for the next solo episode, so we'll just do that. I try and keep these at around an hour, but like I said, I had a lot more about the Switch 2 than I expected to talk about on here. But if you've made it to the end of this episode of Mario's Minute, first of all, thank you very much for coming to the end of this episode here, listening, hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you had some entertainment. I hope you enjoyed yourself for the most part, and it was able to help you maybe get past whatever you were trying to do for the last hour or so. aside from that, I guess it's keyword time. If anybody doesn't know about this, if you haven't made it to the end of one of these episodes, well, again, first of all, welcome to the end. Secondly, keywords, this is something I like to do, and if you use this keyword or key phrase in a comment on the video upload of this episode, I'll know that you made it to the end of this episode of Mario's Minute. And for this, let's go ahead and use the keyword dark. Originally, I was going to say light because I was thinking of like something light or positive, whatever it might be. But then I was thinking, well, what if someone's talking about these switch to light? Then I'm not sure if we're going to know if they made it to the end or not. We don't know. So that's why we're going to pick dark here. Are you afraid of the dark? Were you afraid of the dark? Do you need a light in a dark room? Do you prefer to be pitch black? I will say this. When I'm sleeping, personally, I don't like any light in my room. I'm one of those people, I have blackout curtains. I don't really like to have a night light. Back in college, I had a Xbox 360 in my bedroom because of course I did. And I had one of those power supplies, and there's that orange light that illuminates off of it when it's just plugged in, but it's not on. I ended up taking a piece of black electrical tape and I taped it over that light because the room was at a point and the room was dark enough where if I just turned off all the lights and it was nighttime, it would just illuminate like more than it needed to in that room. But when I was able to cut that down with the black electrical tape, it was fine after that. So let me know. Use the keyword dark in your comment on the video upload and I'll know that you made it to the end. Either way, that is about it for this episode of Mario's Minute. If you enjoyed this episode, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for listening and watching, everyone. And until next month.